Well, welcome to the program today, Alice. I'm looking forward to chatting.
No problem. Always looking forward to having a chat.
Now, I always start by asking, how did you come to Treasury and what made you choose Treasury as your career?
I suspect most people will come up with the same answer. It was probably more luck than knowing what you were doing. For me, going in university, I did an economics and finance degree, and the mystique of what job are you going to do? Treasury was one of them. But when I was applying for jobs, I didn't really know what it was. So I landed in Treasury, realised that A, it was really interesting, B, I was reasonably good at it. So, and fortunately for me, it's been a pretty awesome place to make a career of it.
Just for the listeners, you started your career at AWB for 7 years, which at the time was like the benchmark in Australian Treasury. You moved to Landmark and then on to Fleet Partners. You had 5 years as the Treasurer of Australia Post, and now you've been the Treasurer at Melbourne Airports for the last 4 years. So just sort of recapping that, what would you say have been the highlights in your mind of your career so far?
Highlights is probably working in varied types of businesses, and that's a big call out for anyone, is to try something new and try your game in a different business. So from the weekboard through to car leasing, through to Australia Post, and then straight into infrastructure. So the businesses were very different. So that was an absolute highlight in on of itself. But for each organisation, I probably had a few highlights there. The weekboard, you're right, at the time, it was one of the premier organisations from a Treasury lens. There were a few others at the time, and what was fortunate was a lot of them were in Melbourne as well. So there was a big crew and contingent in the market that you got to learn from. But I was able to get broad experience there from funding, but doing stuff like weather derivatives and securitisations in its different forms. And then, talking about going to Fleet Partners, that was a role. So Landmark was the role at Landmark, and doing stuff for Landmark was all part of the AWB piece there, and doing different funding for the Landmark business. But moving to Fleet Partners, I actually moved out of straight Treasury and took a head of risk role on there, but also supported the securitisation program, where one of the key pieces there was around setting residual values and maintenance profiles for all the car and truck fleet. So that was something that I had the responsibility for, and without loving cars nor trucks, was interesting in itself. But that role was a broadening role, so I did parts of the planning function, strategy function, and it was a real 5 years, if I look back at it, in terms of diversifying skill sets. That was probably the biggest highlight out of that role. And then Australia Post, well, that organisation, when I was there, and it still continues to do it, was an organisation going through a massive transformation. So that was quite, you'll reflect back and see the different changes within that organisation. It continues to do it. So that role also had a varied remit from a Treasury viewpoint. And then Melbourne Airport, infrastructure, growth, and right in the midst of it, managing through the wonderful joys of COVID-19. So who would have
There's no aeroplanes flying, which makes for very interesting risk management.
Absolutely. So that one's probably been the epitome of bringing all the skill sets together and being able to really manage through. The only way you could describe that for the industry is it is a crisis. And now sitting effectively 3-4 months in, it's been a very interesting experience to work through. So, but for me, the other element of all of that is the people that you work with. So across all of those organisations, people have been a huge part of that. So, and a highlight, and continue to have relationships with a lot of people in all of those organisations to this day as well.
I think that's a really good point, Alice, that a lot of younger listeners don't think through. And, everyone wants to see a job description. To me, I think the most important thing in the role that you're going to take is about the people you're going to work for. I think be it your boss, be it other people in the team. They're the people you're going to learn from, and they're the people that are going to make your day enjoyable or not. But more importantly, just around your career development. I think that's a really fundamental thing that to me is probably the most important thing in an interview process, is to work that bit out and whether they're people that you want to work with. And like you say, you get that right, and now there's people that you've worked with a long time ago who are still part of that network for you, and you're in a sanctum.
Oh, absolutely, and it's not a point that you can gloss over lightly, especially within the Treasury community, because if you start in there, we all love it, we all stay in it, and they become a network not only of relationships personally, but also professionally. So they're the first people that you go to when you've got a problem that you want to solve or something that you want to test. You go to people that you know. So across the way, building relationships within the organisations, but also outside of them, and that piece around networking is a huge undervalued, I think, skill set. And I can't emphasise enough the need for people to continue to actually work on those relationships and make them real.
Absolutely. Can we just go back to Melbourne airports? Obviously, infrastructure is a heavy user of debt and capital. Outside of the COVID environment, which is obviously on steroids, but were there any sort of major transactions or things that you've had over the last 4 years that it's worth highlighting?
Yeah, so the time at Melbourne Airport, I've probably raised $3 billion in that time that I've been there. And that's crossed bank debt through to some progressive draw transactions with in a new market for us, and also domestic bond market, and also long dated USPP. So each one of those transactions have been interesting. The latest one was the USP. Oh no, the latest one is we've just gone and raised money in the COVID environment and reached out and done some new bilateral funding after we were able to leverage off our updated funding platform. We moved to a common terms D platform. So we did that in the last 12 to 18 months, and to be able to leverage that immediately was probably again more luck than good management on that side of the equation. So that was very interesting to do that, and building out on skill sets on working through with our banks on what does it look like and what does the rebound look like, but what's the current risk. So it's probably been the most interesting for me. The long dated US, being able to raise 25-year money in natural Aussie dollars, that's pretty cool in anyone's book, right? And that the fact that we could have it delayed settlement for I think it was 8 months or so. That's all really good as well. But then the Asian term facility that we did with combination of Taiwanese and Japanese investors. For me, that was the most pleasing feature out of that, was the fact that it was a progressive draw funding structure, and it matched with our capital investment program. So we could effectively get every 6 months an additional 100 million, but that money was committed in. So yeah, there's been lots of fundraising activities.
Which is the sexy stuff as well, right? That's what everyone loves doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, anything that's tangible and that you can feel it and you're raising money, that's always fun, and it's always great to do a great deal, etc. But again, no different to the networking thing, you're building relationships with investors along the way. So with each one of those then has the responsibilities of those relationships, whether it's from your bank RMs through to your investors, through to the team at the bank that help you support and distribute it. And then that ongoing engagement with those investors, and also equally the rating agencies. I think for me, as much as doing a good deal is great, for me it's actually again around that relationships, and that they're going to be there for when you want money next time, etc. So
which is where coronavirus no doubt has been a real, this is when you need it, this is when those relationships come home to roost, don't they?
Absolutely, and nothing's truer than that as well. And also it's about your own personal approach in that type of uncertainty. And for those that know me that I'm a pretty open book type of character, and honesty and integrity are part of the skill sets that you've got to have as a treasurer, I think, and being able to provide truthful and honest responses to all investors and rating agencies, etc., is one of those key characteristics that you need to display.
Absolutely. And just touching back on your fleet partners, auto financing side of things. Now, Treasury is obviously very niche, but securitization is even more niche within the niche. Anything specific that you sort of learned out of that, or it's worth sharing with investors around that securitization piece?
Yeah, so securitization is another form of financing. So the only difference there to corporate financing is you're literally financing a stream of cash flows, and you need to understand the inherent risks of those cash flows. Whether it's a mortgage securitization, you need to know the risk of people making those ongoing payments, and also the balloon payments. So fleet leasing is, it's a stream of cash flows, monthly payments, and then there's a balloon payment at the back end. So as much as it's niche, the old adage in Treasury is follow the cash and understand the risk. There's nothing, there isn't anything different in securitization. So it's then structuring around understanding that cash flow need and being able to fund the different components. So that's probably the most, the biggest difference between doing a corporate facility where there's one rate. In securitization, there's multiple tranches that match the risk profile, which have different characteristics and different ratings. So you can get different tiers of investors into that as well. So depending on the type of structure that you set up. So for me, between that and project finance, where you're understanding the specificity of cash flows in a project sense, I think everyone in their treasury career really need to try and have a go at that type of financing, because you actually learn those concepts of true risk management, follow the cash mentality from a treasurer's perspective, and being able to structure around it. So I think it's one of those niche ones, but it really is it brings together all the skills of treasury, in my view.
Alice, you've been on the board of the FTA for the last 12 months. Are there any major initiatives that you've got going on there that you're delivering?
Yeah, so what's really interesting around that is a huge focus of the FTA is what's the value proposition for its members. And part of that was very much centred on building out some more digital capability. So COVID's probably as much of being a challenge for your traditional what's the value proposition and the face-to-face type stuff, it's also been a massive opportunity for the FTA. So we had to make a call quite early, was do you try and think for our annual conference to have that as a face-to-face conference, even though it's in November, or do we pivot quickly in terms of developing a virtual conference and spend all the time and energy on making an awesome virtual conference, which is what the team has decided to do. So that's super exciting to see how that transpires. But with that, to make sure that the skills are being built, that virtual digital offering has been rolled out with multiple webinars. The Treasury Manager course is moving online this month, and I think in May there's going to be 8 different webinars for people. I participated on a webinar with respect to documentation and financial covenants pieces, and I think we had something like 80 people online there, and quite a few questions, and the feedback on that has been really, really good. So, and then the watch this space is working through then whether we look to develop Treasury certification. So that's one of the key areas. So for the board, we think that we're already on the track of digitisation and that virtual offering to complement the face-to-face offering. So there's nothing again, relationships are formed more so not online, or except for all the youngins who might just SMS one another and all that sort of stuff. But it's around complementing both and looking at multiple options as to complement that face-to-face. So, and another couple of things that we've done this year is there was a treasurers only dinner in Melbourne, and that ended up being a virtual treasurers only one in Sydney. So, and the feedback on some of those initiatives has been quite good. So, in a nutshell, the board's been leveraging the virtual opportunities. So it's probably time now to support that. We're always looking for new members within the Treasury community, and if I just say and compare what there is on offer now compared to 3 years ago, I think it's all looking pretty exciting, and it's a good place to be part of to help see that growth of the association, because it is much needed.
I'm a big fan of the digital virtual. You're absolutely on the money there. I think it's going to be the way forward, complementing obviously face to face when we're allowed to. But yeah, I think it's the way forward, and this is just fast tracking it, really.
Absolutely, as we all see in terms of this, whether it's Zoom, whether it's WebEx, whether it's how many other digitisation pieces that you can have a face to face contact, and there's nothing surer of being able to look at someone in the eyeballs, whether it's direct across the table or virtually. It's a different experience, and I think we're all just getting a great taste of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've created a business on the back of it, so yeah, I'm all in on it, Alice. Don't worry. We touched on networking earlier. What's been your approach to it, and I guess advice around that to listeners, other than just do lots of it?
Doing lots of it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So we all know that there are those that are more extroverted and those that are more introverted. You've got to network for a purpose. So I think that the first piece for me around networking is, and it depends at what stage of your career that you're at, but I've always tried to work on networking is it's not about what you can get out of someone, it's about building a relationship with people. So, and making sure that they're genuine. So if you actually need to ring someone and reach out to them to ask them something, you've got a foundation that you could work from. So, and my big thing is with networking is the intention is to always learn something from both parties. So if you ask a question from someone, expect to be able to give an honest answer on something else. And there's nothing sure, as we find out in terms of listening to the podcast, everyone's happy to chat about themselves. So everyone's happy to actually provide you an open, honest answer on different things. So for me, it's around the investment in those relationships. Sometimes jobs come out of it. Sometimes finding answers to problems that you're trying to solve come out of it. Sometimes it's around broadening experiences across the industry. And other times it's around the reality is within the Treasury market, everyone knows each other, whether you're on the investment side, on the investor side, on the corporate side, or on the banking side. So just to get to know people and work through and really basically build relationships that you can have that are lasting and genuine and honest.
What about mentors? I guess it's sort of a derivation there of networking. Have mentors played a part in your career thus far?
I think I've probably used my bosses and more senior people in different organisations as quasi mentors. I wouldn't say that I've never had an official professional mentor personally, but I always ask questions. So I think a lot of the things around ask questions and seek advice. So I think anyone can play a role in mentoring, and now it's also a more particular case on there's reverse mentoring, because the older you get, you come to the realisation that you don't know a lot of the stuff that the young'uns know. So you actually want to be reverse mentored, and then you can play a more mature-based mentoring role back to individuals and the like. So I have had lots of really strong, and there's a lot of people that I'd go to ask for information or advice, and I think that's the role of mentor. But for me, mentors is another word for really strong relationships, and I'd say that I've got that reasonably well in spades. across my network.
And generally speaking, it's the informal ones that are the most effective. The formal ones tend to be a bit strained, and it's not natural. So yeah, 100% agree with you there.
I see a role for that for me in the future. Like if I want to be transitioning into different types of roles, whether that be on boards or a more varied role across a different type of organisation, I could see that there'd be mentors because you need to develop different skill sets as well. So I think it's also fit for purpose where you are, but wholeheartedly agree, informal mentors are probably the most invaluable source.
In terms of going back, starting your career and being in the early stages, Alice, what's the one piece of advice you would give to yourself that you know now that you wish you'd been told back then?
Don't overanalyze anything in your head. Ask the question out loud. And I think that's particular for a lot of young ones. The more you can open up and just ask questions and stop that analysis paralysis, the sooner you're going to get to the answer. And realise the easiest way to find the answer is ask a question as opposed to doing it yourself. So do it the easy way.
I love it. What about in terms of hiring and what you look for? What are the key things that are you're wanting to see in people that would be your direct reports?
So each hire is always a little bit different because you're always hiring into a team. So treasury teams tend to be typically smaller in nature. So what I would hire if I was at Australia Post with the team that I had may be different to what I'd need at Melbourne Airport. So the first and foremost is know what you've got and know what gaps you're trying to fill. Second, don't ever hire. My view is don't ever hire yourself. So you want someone with a different view and opinion and skill set, and know what you're good at and what you need the other person to complement, and be open around that as well. Now there are technical skills for my mind are part and parcel. You can't go into Treasury without developing those skills. So, it's pretty easy to judge as to whether someone's got those skills or they don't. You only have to ask 3 or 4 probing questions and get answers to that. And then it's really about the willingness and aptitude to learn. So, an old boss of mine said to me, "Yeah, you've got to demonstrate will and skill. So skills can be taught, but the will and the drive to do stuff, that's inherent in the individual." So that's probably the biggest thing I look for. And the single point of difference is someone demonstrating their will to want the job. Whether they be outspoken or introverted, you can actually probe for that. And they're the biggest success stories in my hires over the time, is when that is neatly balanced with the skill component of the equation.
What do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the CEO, and the board?
Making their life easy. So bringing complicated issues with solutions, not just regurgitating what the problem is. So being a problem solver and being able to see things from their perspective and provide those responses and taking away the problem. So then being equally capable to execute on ideas. So generate ideas and the ability to execute. And undoubtedly, the level of communication and the being able to communicate is absolutely imperative.
And obviously technology is changing very rapidly, Alice. How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in the next few years?
Technology is rapidly evolving. So when we talk around skill sets of people that you employ to have, I'm looking for people that I employ to have those skills and being able to let me know what that is. So that's clearly not going to be a natural attribute that I've got. So I look for others to have those skills, but be a fast mover in terms of being able to implement different things. So, but more and more, it depends on whether your treasury is platform driven, etc. So every organisation is different, and you'd need to understand what that piece is. But the biggest thing around technology it's around simplification and automation of process. So otherwise you're just creating an additional level of complexity within an organisation that's not necessarily necessary. But it's not necessarily a skill set that I have the most passion for, but I see the absolute need for it as well. So respect the fact that we need to keep developing that space. And so if anyone ever is looking for a job with me, show that they've got that skill set and they're already half a chance.
You and I are of the same school there, Alice. I'm a technophobe.
but yeah, I'm happy to learn it, but I don't know if I'm a huge fast mover in those things.
No, I prefer someone else to tell me how to do it and show me. That's absolutely my way. Well, Alice, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. As always, I love chatting and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Treasury Talent podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lynch. Today I'm joined by Alice van der Geest, who is the Group Treasurer at Melbourne Airport Corporation. We talk a lot today about networking, about diversifying in your career, and Alice is a great chatter, so she'll give you some really good insight into a few things that she's done and a few insights that she's got that others haven't really brought up before. I hope you enjoy the chat today with Alice.